we have like our way of living and God's way of living. They're completely different. And today we're going to be looking at the story of Moses and how he brought the children out of Egypt.
Moses, he's still the general. He's still trying to be Pharaoh. He has the power. Like, he's almost like second in command of this beautiful country. He has the power to either overthrow his father. He has the power to free the slaves. He has the power to do all of this because he commands the army. He commands the guards. He's the one who like literally provides protection for his country.
Have Angela Day on the podcast today on the Experiencing God podcast. And Angela, you're out of high school, but where are you, like, academically? Are you going to college or working, or how's it work?
So midway through my senior year, as I was looking at the different options, I could either go to college, get into debt, or I could just immediately start working, doing stuff that I love to do. I love being in the cafeteria, I love being in the bakery, and I love working with different ministries, but I felt called to, instead of go to college, to take the time that I have here, the remaining time here on earth before Christ comes back, is to service others either through spreading the word verbally or spreading his word physically through my acts of service.
In our last episode, we were talking about the living the God-centered life, right? So we have God's will and we have our will, right? And we have like our way of living and God's way of living, and they're completely different. They're vast. They can't mix together. And so we were just contrasting those two and figuring out how to live the God-centered life. And today we're going to be talking about living that God-centered life and directing our plans, all of what we do around what God has like given us. And today we're going to be looking at the story of Moses and how he brought the children out of Egypt, or even if he brought the children out of Egypt. When God sought to deliver the children of Israel from Egypt, he found Moses, right? And he sought Moses was a very headstrong man, right? And he chose, or he wanted to do it in his own way. And there was 40 years of him learning how to do it God's way. And so we can see a big contrast between those two, right? There's God's way and our way. And we have to figure out how to get rid of our way and do God's way.
So, I mean, in the story you have, like, Moses is in Egypt, he's a prince of Egypt, and he slays an Egyptian. And then he flees because he was found out, and then, you know, later on, you know, he spent 4 years learning all that, right?
Yeah.
And then he's approached by God through, you know, the burning bush, you know, I am who I am, etc., bring my people out of Egypt. Well, Moses, you'll notice, Moses' plans didn't really correspond to his plans necessarily, right? And I think that's something that the lesson that's not something that really brought out, but that you actually see his plans really prominently, that his plans were not what God's plans were from the burning bush, and he was trying to make excuses off the bat. You know, I can't speak, or I don't even know. What were his excuses?
Like, I can't talk, I'm not worthy.
Yeah, and why would they believe me?
Why would they believe me?
Right? The prince of Egypt who just left while they're all stuck
who murdered a guy.
Right.
He was wanted by his father.
He definitely had an idea. I mean, I could imagine, like, if he's like he was saying, a prince of Egypt, and he's, okay, for one, Israelites hate Egyptians, right? They're their slave masters, and they're not excited to go follow an Egyptian, right? So you got this guy, and he's the grandson of Pharaoh, right? He's the son of the Pharaoh's daughter, right? And if he walks into the Israelite camp, how do you think they would react?
They would be standoffish. They would be wary of, because history. I was going through commentaries, preparing for different things dealing with Moses. Commentary says that Moses was the general. He was the head general of the Egyptian armies. And according to history, during the time of Moses, historically, they don't talk about Moses because That's
He's a Hebrew.
he's a Hebrew, and also during the time of Moses, that is when Egypt, which was a beautiful, had the
Big
most trade in
Mm-hmm.
the
Mm-hmm.
Middle
Right.
East.
Right.
When Moses came,
Mm-hmm.
and after everything dealing with Moses, it just went downhill. It still hasn't recovered. So now, before all this happens, you have the head captain, head general of the Egyptian army. You're that person, and you walk into, you know you're a Hebrew. You know
Mhm.
something's different about you,
Yeah.
rather than being like your mom or your grandfather, because you're being trained to be the next pharaoh.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
We can definitely see that there's a difference between what Moses is going to do and what the Israelites want to do, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so Moses was a pretty headstrong guy, right? Like we were saying, if he would have walked in there and would have been just like, "Hey guys, your
Mhm.
God Jehovah has told me that I'm going to take you out of here. Like I'm going to get you out of this," they'd be like, "No, you're not." They'd probably like,
Right.
"Go ahead."
Well, and I mean, what I was kind of saying is that would be a very strong deterrent. You know, I mean, that alone to
Mhm.
me in my head would be enough to be like, really don't want to go do that because they're not going to like me because you know that reminds me of Matthew the tax collector and
Yeah.
Jesus calling him
Yeah,
out, right?
exactly.
Because Matthew betrayed his people.
Yeah,
Right? He betrayed his people, okay, and then he went and became a tax collector, and tax collectors did not have a great reputation,
And then
right?
he's kind of in this middle ground where either side hates him now.
Mhm.
And like you hear, I don't think this was referring directly to him, but even the Pharisees, in the Gospels, you know, are like, why are you eating with tax collectors and sinners? And you know, they already have this
Right.
disapproving outlook on tax collectors and Romans, and then the Romans aren't going to want him
Right.
because he kind of
He's a Jew.
betrayed them.
Right.
Yeah.
But here's the thing: is Jesus still picked Matthew, and God still chose Moses.
Moses had, I'm sure, an idea of how he was going to do it,
Mm-hmm.
but how, like, God had his way and Moses had his way, and
Exactly.
it took 40 years to figure that out.
Yeah.
And so I think that when Moses actually came back and he was like, "Okay, I've met with your God Jehovah, right?
Mhm.
And I've seen him and I've experienced him." He had an experience to share, and I don't know. I feel like they would have seen a difference. Like the Israelites would have seen a difference between the Moses, the Pharaoh kind of Moses, the Egyptian kind of Moses, and the Moses that had experienced God,
Mhm.
right? And when they saw the difference between those two things, I think that they were convinced that there was a difference between Moses' will and God's will, and Moses' will was now centered in God's will. And I just want to I don't know, what do you guys think? What do you guys think would have happened if Moses would have just jumped right in there with his own will and would have tried to get the Israelites out with his own will?
Moses, he's still the general. He's still training to be Pharaoh. He has the power. Like, he's almost like second in command of this beautiful country. He has the power to either overthrow his grandfather. He has the power to free the slaves. He has the power to do all of this because he commands the army. He commands the guards. He's the one who literally provides the protection for this country.
Yeah, and he doesn't know what to do. He's the boss.
He's the boss.
Yeah.
And then he messes up. He kills someone, it's found out. So now there's this price on his head. This high general was second in command.
Mm-hmm.
He's brought down.
Mhm.
Talk about pride goes before a fall.
Yeah.
So he runs away to Midian.
Mhm.
And so he's now herding sheep.
Mhm.
From going between captain of armies
One
to
of the
being a
highest people in Egypt.
highest people to
Yeah.
being a shepherd, which
He's
looking
one
at
of
the
the lower people.
looking at the story of David had all these brothers who 3 of them went off to war. Some may have owned a shop within Bethlehem. But here's David watching sheep.
Mm-hmm.
That was, according to the culture of the time, that was the lowest job. That's like the social standings they have. That's
Mhm.
at the bottom.
Right.
That's
Yeah.
below the bottom,
Below the
actually.
Well, and it's interesting because I was just looking at Enoch. God took him before he died to heaven with him, and it's interesting. It took Enoch 365 years to get to the point where God could take him, and it took Moses 40 years just to get to the point where God could work
Could use
through him the way that he needed to.
right.
And you almost wonder if Moses had a completely different idea at the beginning of how he was going to free. I mean, he was the captain of the army, right? He was like, "All right, let's go to war. Let's overthrow Egypt."
Right.
And so God had to work even through just that
Mm-hmm.
to get to the point where Moses could just follow where God led.
Going back to the question you asked me, right? He has all this knowledge.
Yeah.
Right, as head of the army. Imagine he sneaks into the camp. I mean, this is just a scenario because we live here. No, okay. But like he sneaks into the camp and he's like rallying the people of Israel, right? And he's like, "We're getting you guys out. We're gonna free you." And he starts this whole underground operation, whatever. They start making spears out of sticks or whatever, right?
Yeah.
And then they try to leave, right? And let's I don't know. Let's say there's 1 million Israelites there, and I mean, you have to think about this versus one of the most powerful, the highest world powers at the time in the world.
Mhm.
Think about how many of them would have died, right?
Yeah.
That's assuming that the people would have trusted him to begin with to actually get out
Yeah.
of there, right? To have that kind of faith in somebody who was a part of the people who were oppressing you, right?
Mhm.
And so you have to think about that, and that's oftentimes kind of what happens with our thoughts. Some of the Israelites might have gone. Some of the Israelites, some of
Well,
them would
a
have
lot of
gotten out, right? A lot of them would have gotten out, maybe.
Mhm.
But, and oftentimes we kind of have that same mindset. We're like, we have this idea, and people don't really pray about it. They're not really wondering if this is God's will, but they're like, this is a nice, good thing to do. So they carry out a plan, and then, sometimes it doesn't work out, or maybe it might seem like it works out, but it doesn't have the same effect that it would typically. We have this whole mission project that we're planning, but there was no prayer involved. It was all about maybe it was self. Maybe it was to elevate self, right? And it's like, oh, look at all these people we helped, but that wasn't really what mattered. That didn't glorify God.
And I heard a story about some people, and you might have heard it as well, where basically they were trying to start these Bible studies in these dorms, and they tried it for multiple years, but then they suddenly realized that they were not trying to start the Bible study. They were trying to start the Bible studies. They weren't looking for where God wanted them to work.
Right.
And as soon as I think it was within a week, as soon as they started just praying about it and just looking for opportunities to minister to people that came to them or had open hearts, within a week they had multiple contacts.
Right.
And it grew and expanded super rapidly as soon as they started focusing on where God wanted them instead of where they thought they needed to be.
Yeah, that kind of brings it back to a point. We often ask God to bless our plans and promise to glorify.
plans.
Yeah, promise to glorify Him after it happens if it works. Kind of just this go through thing. We do this every time. We just pray before we do it, and it sometimes works, but it doesn't always work. But when we take our plans away, like you're talking about, and we okay, God, what is your plan here?
Exactly.
How are we supposed to experience you through this? How are we supposed to do what you want us to do? When you surrender that, God's like, boom, all right, that's what I wanted you to do. That's what I wanted right there. And He can accomplish amazing things through us. And I think that's what happened with Moses. When Moses was like, okay, God, I give up. I've made so many mistakes. The Israelites don't accept me. I'm just going to go to you. This happened at the burning bush, right? At the end, He's like, okay, I'm done. I'm just going to go with you, and I'm going to see what happens. And this amazing experience happened, right?
Yeah.
Amazingly, the whole, they left Egypt with, all of the Egypt's possessions, right? They left Egypt. They drew Egypt. Well, okay, they didn't. God did. But God drew them into the Red Sea, killed all of the Egyptian army, right?
Yeah. And Pharaoh
Strongest world
too.
power. Pharaoh too. All of this. This destroyed Egypt. And like she said, they've never recovered from it. But it's crazy how when we separate from our will and we just go to God's will, amazing things happen.
Right. We take these plans, right? We lay our plans, we lay our life, everything we have, everything we are at the foot of Christ, at the foot of the cross. It changes. Yeah, at the foot of the cross. That's everything. You take the story of Noah, right? Noah is instructed to build this ark because God is going to completely not destroy the earth. Everything on it, right? He's going to flood it, right? And it doesn't make any sense. Why is this guy building a boat this big?
Yeah.
What's he gonna do? That sounds crazy, right? But look at how that turned out. In Romans 8:28, is it?
Yeah. All things work together.
All things work together for the good of those that love him. And that's a promise. That's a promise I think we shall claim. And they are plans at the foot of the cross.
Absolutely. And when we lay those plans at the foot of the cross, it's gonna work amazingly.
Yeah.
It's our will is going to be like morphed into God's will, right?
Uh-huh.
And that will is gonna amaze us beyond like belief,
Mhm.
right? And it's gonna accomplish amazing things beyond
Right.
belief. And it's
It doesn't mean life's gonna be perfect. It doesn't mean everything's gonna go smoothly. It doesn't mean everything's gonna feel like it's not gonna feel like
Yeah, definitely.
things are gonna go how you want to. You're gonna backslide, you're gonna fall, and there will be consequences. Life doesn't become you're not sitting on cloud nine until you die.
Yeah, but what we do know is found in the book of Jeremiah 29, verse 11. He says, "For I know the thoughts." He knows the
Yeah,
plans
exactly.
that he has for us.
exactly.
These aren't of evil. These aren't for destruction. They're for hope
Yeah.
and a future. We all have a future that God has already planned for us.
Absolutely.
It's just up to us with how we deal with that future.